Okay, so right now I am going to replace my motor mounts. And I've actually already done this one right here on the driver's side. And for me, this one was pretty easy and straightforward. So that one's already done. I assumed it would be about the same process on the passenger side. But of course, the passenger side is a little different. Got some construction going on here as I've been doing other things. But I wanted to go ahead and take care of this while I got stuff out of the way, and it needs to be done anyway. So I've got the motor jacked up. I've got a couple jacks under here, and I've already removed the old motor mount and the bracket. This is the old motor mount that came out and was broke on the back, as you can see, and the screw was also loose there. Already soaked, cleaned up, and painted the bracket, and I got that new mount to put in place. Okay, so I've got that out of the package, and I believe it sits on the bracket like that. I was cleaning up the bolts, but essentially you get 3 bolts with a washer that mount the bracket to the block. And then in my case, I had 1 bolt with a nut that went on this side and another bolt with no nut that went on the opposite side, because there is already a threaded end on that side. And then I also have this larger nut and washer that goes on the post or stud or whatever when it slips through the other end of the bracket that's welded onto the body. Alright, so this is kind of giving me a little grief. I just now couldn't quite fit it in there, so I took the oil filter off, and I am now able to slide it in the bracket, essentially putting it in upside down. I now have just enough room to slide that post into the slot. I still can't spin this thing around the way it needs to be. And engine's gonna need to come up anyway. Underneath here, I currently have the jack holding up. Well, it's actually behind the bell housing because I got the rear mount removed, which we're gonna replace next. So I'm putting a jack under the oil pan, except I'm taking a 2x4 so we don't crush it. So I got that in place, and now I'm going to jack up the front of the engine some. Now when I come up here, it's giving myself a little more room to work with, and I'm going to spin this around the other way, and I think I'm going to see if I can mount the bracket to it now. And I'm just kind of sliding my bracket loosely in place. Looks like I need to bring the engine up a little more. And give her a couple more pumps down here. And now I'm back up top, and I can at least line these up. I'm going to put my bolts loosely in place. And take my 3 bolts and washers and just seat them in place. Now I'll have them all seated in place, still loose. I'm going to try to line these other bolts up and get this secure. Okay, I really just shocked myself here and defied all odds, but this actually lines up pretty well right now. So I'm just threading this first bolt into the side that has the nut sort of built into the bracket, and then I'm going to work this other one on next. Then I'm going to take this nut and bolt, put it on the opposite side over here. Okay, I got it in, and it's probably worth noting I put this back one in, I don't know, upside down, backwards, how I thought I would. So the bolt head I got on the back side with the nut over here facing outwards, and that'll just make it much easier to access, I think, tightening. So I got all of those in now, more or less hand tight, and now I'm going to take my larger nut and washer crawl underneath and put it on the back side of this to hold that post that's sticking through. My nut is a little bit rounded or tapered, whatever you call it, on one side, so it kind of just goes this one way. Got that nut started. I'm back up top. Alright, got these 3 tightened. I'm going to do these 2. These ones up here, at least for me, are all 9/16. It's easy to get a ratchet on these first 3. I got to use a wrench to get to these other 2, however. If you got a good ratcheting wrench, it's really not that big of a deal. Just got to climb back down and tighten on the bolt on the stud underneath. And it is a larger size. I think mine is a 3/4 inch. So I'm going to tighten that up. Alright, got that tightened on. I used 2 extensions, and then towards the end I needed the deep socket. But I spared you the bad camber angle. But that is now secure in place. And I guess we'll let the front down a little bit and move on to the back. Now we'll move on to the back. This is kind of where it started, because I never set out to do the motor mounts. But yeah, here's the back one. It's pretty worn. It was missing bolts. Skid plate had a problem. Well, it's a shelf underneath now. I'll pull that out in a second. But basically, I became aware of this problem when I was pulling off the valve cover, and I could not reach this back bolt. It was tucked under here. And that's what had me start looking at the engine mounts. You see the left passenger side one had been broke, and it was missing a bolt. And like I said, this was broke, or this was very worn and missing several bolts in the back, probably from driving off a cliff a while back. Going back under the car. Lighting is terrible under here. But basically, I'm going to have to move my jack here, and I'll probably move it to the bell housing area, because I currently have it right where I essentially mount this thing, and then the skid plate will ultimately cover all of this. Alright, here's our skid plate. It's upside down, so this would be the bottom. Flip it over. So it'll be something like that. Coming up in here, our transfer case. Guess we'll go ahead and put this rear mounting bracket together. Get them on. Get my jacks back. I will take this plate, and it's going to mount this way underneath. This towards the exhaust. This bolt is going to go in and mount to the bottom on this plate here underneath. This piece is going to mount up like this. This bolt and nut are going to hold this side in place. This bolt is going to go here and into the other hole on the bottom of the transmission. In my case, when I took it off, this bolt was gone. This thing was busted too. We're going to reassemble this. I'm going to take the new bracket, slide these 2 fittings on. I'm going to put that one, this side on like this, slide it through here. You're going to put the other end on and put that in nut back in place. Remove this nut, and then we'll install this on the bottom of the transmission. And then when we go to put the skid plate on here, I think we're going to be looking to line this hole up here and these 2 holes up there. We'll stick these bolts in and tighten that down. Tighten these to the side. I'm going to come under the Jeep. I'm going to mount this in place on the bottom of the transmission, securing these 2 bolts in. So now I'm going to take my skid plate, then I'm going to place said skid plate under the vehicle. Very loosely going to put in a couple of the side mounting screws to the bottom of the frame here to hold it in place. Alright, and I awkwardly kind of have that very loosely on. I just sort of put them on where they were. I'm going to go to the other side. Coming to the other side, I've lifted it up. I've lined up my stud guide coming out there. And now I'm just going to put a couple bolts loosely in place here and here. I've got this loosely held in place now. I'm going to take these 2 bolts, slide them up here into the motor mount itself. And now I am just tightening these 2 guys in place onto the motor mount. Got those 2 tightened up. Now go ahead and take my nut and tighten it on here. Okay, and there we finally got it. Everything's tightened up. Released my jacks. Motor is now properly in place.